So welcome to the very first Reactgs meetup in Penang. So yeah, let's give applause. So this is the, as I said before, that this is the very first time we do a Reactgs meetup in Penang itself. And just want to ask, is like anyone first time in this building? Okay, so most of you guys know where is it, right? So I just want to do a very short housekeeping. Washroom, toilet is over there, so just turn one U-shape. Okay, if you want to release yourself, go and relieve yourself, okay? Don't have to ask for permission, don't need to raise hand, and then whatever. So we appreciate you guys spend your afternoon on Saturday here. And we really appreciate that you are here, and hopefully that you're going to learn something in the next 4 hours. All right. So this meetup is co-organized by Penang Dev Circle from Facebook. So they are the one that sponsor the refreshment, and we also have a supporting partner of Eject, which is the co-working space in here. So in case you guys haven't heard of it, so this is actually a state-sponsored project, state government-sponsored project. So there's a co-working space over there, and then they organize that event. Okay, so they organize that event from time to time. So if you're interested in some of the tech events that they have, I will suggest you to follow them on Facebook. So they have like at least one event per week. All right. So next is the React Penang community is pretty much new. So this is our Facebook group. So hopefully you guys are already in there. If you're not in there, please join here. So we are just a bunch of React lovers, and we are also develop and use React on our daily basis on our projects for our clients and stuff. So we don't really have a lead in terms of like this meetup and everything else in the community itself. So we sort of like practice the so-called Roman Senate style, meaning that at each time we will, appoint someone to organize the meetup, and then we will organize the meetup, okay? So this time it is my turn, so next time it will be a different lead to organize the meetup. So the structure itself, it's going to be once every quarter, meaning that once every 3 months. The reason is we try to keep things fresh, and then so that's why that the meetup is quite different with the other meetup, because most of the other meetup normally do at night. So but we choose it on Saturday afternoon so that everyone have the time to attend, and parking here is troublesome. So Saturday, yeah, nobody you won't have any parking problem, okay, on Saturday. So as I mentioned before, that we're going to have a different lead. So each time there will be like a different lead to organize the meetup. So this time is me, and then the other time there will be a different person. So if you're interested to do your own React.js meetup, let us know. We can help you. But you're going to do the lead, but we can support you on some other stuff like the venue, the logistic part, and then the refreshment and stuff, alright? So we welcome anyone who want to host their own React.js meetup. Let us know, we can help as much as we can, okay? Alright? And it will be also in different format as well. So this one, it's of course, it's very obvious that this is a talk presentation style meetup. So later on, we might have a different kind of meetup. For example, there might be a workshop, like half-day workshop, they're focused on React.js or maybe React Native as well. And we might also have a code jam section and study group. So this is much more casual, like we come together and then we go together in React, of course, obviously. And then we might have a competition like hackathon in the future. But okay, this is for the future. So I'm not promising anything right now. So again, please join our group if you haven't joined it. And next is I'll introduce the co-lead, the lead of Penang Dev Circle, Gui. So he will going to give an introduction on Dev Circle.
So hi, I'm Gui. I'm the lead for Dev Circle Penang. So it will be a very short introduction. So We just started on May this year, and then this is our group. Please join because we will have events every month. We are looking for the next event for next month. So if you are in the group, you'll be able to know which event is organized by Dev Circle Penang. Okay. So this is the agenda for today. If you, just a sum that you will be able to know what this event is. So let's start. Thank you.
So I forgot that I haven't introduced myself. So my name is Nathan. I'm a freelance developer. So I practice Reactgs quite frequently as well. So today what I'm going to talk about is like how to learn Reactgs. So this is suitable for beginner and intermediate, and of course for advanced people as well. Like how you're going to improve yourself in React. Okay, all right. So this is a little bit about me. I'm a freelance developer. I self-taught myself on coding. So I started my career as a WordPress developer, and gradually I moved towards Reactgs and web development, Node.js and Firebase. And so I just curious, like, who are you, right? What's your level in Reactgs? So who's here just getting started? Wow. Okay, good. Quite a lot of you. Anyone here write Reactgs regularly? Okay. So who's the master? No. I'm this guy. Okay. So no master here, right? If you're a master, then you're gonna talk in here, not me. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna talk about a brief story about how I encountered with Reactgs myself. So my first encounter with Reactgs is back in 2015. So it's about 4 years ago. So this is the so-called project file. So just for information, this project is no longer. I abandoned this project long time ago. So, but this is one of my very first project that I do. So if you notice that the structure is quite different with the React right now. For those that already know what is React is, then you will realize that why it's so different, right? You notice that there's no web app, and then there's no source file, there's only app, and then most of the stuff are pretty much the same. So this is the package file that we used back then 4 years ago. So there's a few things that you will notice that first thing, back then we used JSX file. Right now it's just JavaScript file. So I also don't understand why back then we have to use like .jsx file. Alright? Then 4 years ago we used Group for compiling because there's no webpack back then. So you can imagine the hassle. And then you always get an error and you don't know what the heck the error is. Okay? And then we use Reflux for Redux, and Reflux I think it has been, I think Facebook team maybe still use it. But out of that, I don't think anyone else use it because, I mean, this thing is really difficult to understand. So luckily we have Redux right now. So, and also you notice that this is also pre-EX6 era. So this is EX5. So imagine back then, how difficult is it to learn React? And we also, I mean, compared to right now, right? I mean, right now, if you want to learn React.js, you pretty much Google. You can get a lot of courses, some are free, some are paid. I mean, even you can go to Udemy and then pay maybe like 10 bucks. Then you get a full course. But back then, we have to learn it by reading other people's code, which is, I mean, how much you can get from there, right? Because back then, the community is really small compared to right now. So compared to today, there's a lot of resources online, especially like if you go to dev.to, dev.tu, there's a lot of articles written by developers themselves. In case this presentation that I'm going to give, a lot of articles are actually referring back to them. All right. So there's, for those that is like learning right now or new, there's really no reason why you are not going to learn React.js because it's so much more easy compared to back then. All right. So okay. But the question is, most people ask me is like, you know, why React? You know, why not other things? So I'm going to tell you why React and not the other framework or the other coding language or so on and so on. Alright? So this is a very basic login form. So what they do is like, okay, so here's a home page, you click on login, then you fill out your details, and then you log in, then you get data, then you get your user data, and then you can log out. Okay, so it's a simple login form, and then you can pretty much create with any web technologies. It doesn't mean that you have to create with React. So, like, what we need is normally, we need a home page to decide that if it's a login, then we'll show the logout link, meaning that the user already logged in. If they haven't logged in yet, then probably we'll show a login link. Then we have a login, probably have a login page. And then we'll capture the username. And then we submit the credential. Oh, sorry. Yeah, spoiler. Okay, so we'll submit credential to the backend, and then once we get the credential back, we probably redirect the user back to the home page. Okay? So this is a very simple layout. So if you do this in the normal HTML, CSS, jQuery way, you're probably gonna need this script, this small file. You have a homepage.html, you have a login.html, then you have a script to write your jQuery script, then a style.css to write your CSS. Alright? So this for a long time, this is pretty much how we work in web. Alright? Doesn't matter whether you are using PHP, Ruby on Rails, or some other framework, but it pretty much go down to this concept. Alright? We always have HTML, JavaScript, and CSS file. So our login file will probably like this. Okay. So this is the form. Then we probably have a one input line, and then a button to submit, and then there's a script, and then we refer to jQuery, and then there's a CSS as well. Alright, this is a simple HTML file. And for our CSS, so we probably written it in this way, and then we probably have a jQuery script to detect the button on click, and then we call Ajax to our backend to get back the data. And then once we get back the data, we probably need to redirect back to the home page again. Alright? So this is how the normal way, the traditional way is doing the login form. So as I say that for the past maybe 20 and 30 years, this has been always our way of doing things. Maybe 20 years because CSS is not like more than 30 years. So it's always like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. It's always these three files. It doesn't matter which framework you're using, it's always these three files. So, but it's not really anymore because of the JavaScript framework that we have right now. Like, so in React, right, we pretty much simplify everything. Because in React, if you want to do this, all we need is possible to do it with just an index.js. Okay, it's possible. But most of us, we don't do it that way because normally we break it out by component, just for the sake of human who are reading it. But it is possible to do it just with one file. So compared to last time, we always have to write separately. Like we have to write our HTML markup in one file, we have to write our CSS in another file, we have to write our script in JavaScript in another file. So it always, these three files combined together, we get the layout that we want. But in React, we can simplify to do just in one file, everything in here, and then we can done it from there. Alright? So, okay. It's okay if you couldn't read it, but this is the basic of a React code. So, like what you see before, there's a HTML structure here, which is similar to the HTML structure. And then there's a styling, I use inline styling, okay? And then there's an action trigger. So when the value changes, what we're going to do. So as you can see that React combined all those three files into one simple Reactgs file, alright? So comparison, like back then you have to write multiple files, but right now you probably only have to like write one JavaScript. That's why they say that in the future, we might even able to build a rocket ship with JavaScript. Because right now JavaScript is everywhere. It's in your web, it's in your mobile, it's in your desktop. So some of the things that you use you might not be aware that actually built with JavaScript instead of like their own native code. So that's how powerful JavaScript is and going forward. And this is the direction that for web development, this is probably the direction that we are going forward. Maybe in 4 or 5 years later, maybe React might not exist anymore. Might be some other open source framework that are going to replace it. But I would say that JavaScript is still here. Because JavaScript has been here for around, I think, more than 20 years, since the 90s. So, but they are still here, and then they are going very strong right now. So, in the future, hopefully that we might see that JavaScript in almost every other field. Alright? So, let's see if like we want to create this login form, how we can create this in React. So, normally what we're going to do is we have a React class, and then we render the code in here. So here, right, we can detect like whether there's an authentication data or not. Is there any user credential in here? If there's a user credential, then probably I'll just render a home page. If not, probably I'll just render a login page. Okay, login form. Then here is where I get the data from my backend using Redux. I'm going to talk about this later on, but I'm just going to try to like demonstrate to you like how React works. Okay. So then we probably have a handle click here to listen for the event by the user. Okay, so this is the login form in here. So here we have we can detect like changes from the input form itself, then the password form, and then on click, then we can do something in here. All right. So this is the basic of React. Now some of the code here it's not the so-called standard practice, because I just showcase the power of React. So this is definitely not the best practice. All right. Next is so like for example, once they log in, then there's data in here. Then I'll just render home. Okay. So this is how React does compared to like the normal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So here we can actually do it all in one file. All right. So now you understand like how React works. So right now we're going to talk about, okay, so right now if you want to learn React, what should you learn first and what is the first step? All right. So here's the roadmap to learn Reactgs, and of course we're going to start with level 0 because you have to learn HTML and CSS. I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? So after all, this is web. So you have to understand what is like HTML markups and then what is the CSS. Otherwise, there's no point you go and learn React right now because this is the basic of all web development. Whether or not whether we JavaScript, no matter how powerful JavaScript is, this is still the basic. All right. So where to learn HTML and CSS? Personally, I think Code Academy has a very good tutorial on HTML and CSS, and both of them are free. So you can scan this, and there's a link here. You can scan this and then learn it on your own if you want to learn it. All right. So don't worry, I'll include the slide in our Facebook group later on, so you can click from there. So you don't really have to like capture it right now. So optional on level 0, it is good you learn Sass because Sass simplify CSS a lot and it makes things really easy. And moving forward as well, that Sass is going to help you a lot in React itself. Alright? So here's a very good tutorial that I find in YouTube. It's only 20 minutes and this guy really explained Sass very easy to understand on the tutorial itself. So you can actually go through here and it's only 20 minutes and I would suggest you go to learn this so that you will understand more about what is Sass. Alright? So this is level 0. So right now we go to level 1. Level 1 of course is like you must have some JavaScript basics, alright, before you learn React. So what are the basics that you need to learn? You need to learn Eject classes. You need to learn what is len, what is constant variable, arrow function, strategy, assignment, map and filter, and lastly is the module system of ESX. Okay, so these 6 items you have to learn it before you actually went to React. Otherwise, there's a lot of code that you won't be able to understand because this is the basic of pretty much JavaScript and also the EXX. Of course, there are much more basic level, like for example, the difference between like array and object and all those stuff, the syntax things. I'm not going to talk about that in here because I expect you should know that, because unless you're not from programming background, but I hopefully that you're from programming background, alright? So, okay, Reactgs classes. So Reactgs classes is like this. Let's say a white class, a developer class, then there's a hello function, and then there's a value in here. So in this case, if I call this class, and I call this return.hello, I should be able to generate this string together with my name. Alright? So this is the basic of Reactgs class. So if you notice, right, some other programming language also have this sort of structuring thing, like PHP, I think Java as well. So there are probably some other programming languages that have the similar things. So this is quite similar with other programming language. And in classes, we also, of course, we have like inheritance, whereby right now, this is React developer, I'm going to extend my previous developer class, and here, I'm still going to I can access back the whole parent class function, the hello, which is the same as the previous class that I declared here. So, but I can add additional class that is unique to this React developer class. So here I can render it whatever string in here. Alright? So you can even like do like passing value from the child, the parent, and then it still can render it out. Alright? So this is the basic of Reactgs class. Then in React itself, normally the way we use it is like this. We have an app, and then we refer to the React component. So this React component is coming from the React library, and then we can just when we do this, then we can use all the functions available in the React component. Alright? So next is the let and const. So normally in JavaScript, we have these three types of variables. So in the basic case, it's like we normally use these variables in the occupation, and then there's a let, and then there's a constant variable as well. So what is the rule of thumb? The rule of thumb is like, in variable, normally it's declared globally, meaning that as long as it's the same file, then anyone can access the variable. But for constant, it's more locally, meaning that it's only declared inside the functions, and then it cannot be used globally. And of course, constant cannot be changed. And then let, same as well, declare locally, but it can be changed. So it's sort of like a mix between variable and constant. So the rule of thumb is always, if you can change, the rule of thumb, I guess the best practice is like we always declare in constant. Only if like maybe after you code a few functions, you realize that you might need to change that particular variables, then only you change the let. So always start with constant first, then if you need to change the variable maybe by your script, then only you change the let. Alright? So in React itself, normally we do is this way. We declare a constant in here, and then we can render in here. Alright? Arrow function. So this is the typical JavaScript function that everyone understands. So this is a text function, and then there's probably some things that you're going to do in here. And then this is the arrow function. So the way arrow function work, right, is pretty much you can say like the lazy way of writing codes, and also the fastest way of writing codes. So this one and this one is actually the same. The only difference is like you notice, oh, okay, you don't have to write the whole function out. Then you just pretty much just return this, and then it is done. Of course, there's a lot more for the arrow function, but the way you think it is like my thought about JavaScript developer, like, is like, we are a bunch of lazy people. Like, and we try to write the code as short as possible, right? We don't like to write a lot of repetitive. So that's why I guess this is why that we invented the whole arrow function thing, to make things a lot more simple, and then a lot more easy to type it out, and then we can complete our work much more faster. But to people that is not from JavaScript background, then they will say that, what the heck is this, right? So I'm telling you, right, this thing and this thing is actually the same thing. It's just a shorthand version, alright? So there's a lot of ways to use arrow function. Like for example, if you want to pass variable here, then you can get the variable from when you pass it in here and then here. Okay, you can even do it this way. So this and this are pretty much the same thing, right? And of course, if you test it out, then you can get this. You can do it this way. So this is the quickest way, right? We just simply type it out, and then when you call this function, it straight away return this string, right? So in React, normally we use it on. Arrow function it's like something. It's one of the main thing in React. It uses in almost all the codes, right? So here is how we use it. This is the React functions, and then this is our class function in React. So basically, it's the same thing. Then the structuring assignment. So here is another JavaScript Basics. So if let's say that I have these variables, right? These are object variables. We have a first name, last name, and then we have developer true, and then we have age. Then we can actually do it this way. So instead of like we do like developer dot first name, developer dot last name, we can actually write this way. Then we can straight away access the first name variable and the last name variable and the developer variable as well. So you don't have to like write multiple dots to just get a particular chunk of that object variables, right? So this is the structuring assignment. Then you can even do something like this, right? This is an array, right? Array itself, they have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the array, and here we can actually convert the number into string. So this 1 will equal to 1. This 2 will equal to 2. Of course, if you declare 3, 4, 5, then you will follow suit. Alright? So like for example, 1, 2, 4. So 1, 2, 4. Then in React itself, we use this a lot because of the state that we have in React. So normally we just declare this way so that we can use whatever variable available in this object state, right? And yeah, there's a different way of using the structuring assignment. So okay, this one is really interesting. So you can even do it this way, so that when you pass in an object, only a certain part of object can be used in that function, right? So next is map and filtering. So normally we have a list of items in the array. Then we probably have multiple objects in that array. So in a map, then we can actually render out whatever here into our HTML markup, right? For filter, we can filter out the list in array, and then we map it out. Then Eject module. For Eject module, right, it's the way we import file. So in React, we can actually do it this way. So this one is actually coming from our node module, our library, but of course we can use it for our own code as well. Then we can use export default to export the whole thing of our class into another file using export default. So this is a module system. Alright, so the way it works is like, let's say I have this function 4 times and then plus 2, these two functions, I can put it in one file, one utility file, and then in another file, I can use this to import out the function, okay? So there's this book called JS Up and Going. So this book is it's published by Larry, but the publisher, the author actually give it in free in GitHub. So here's a link to GitHub. If you need a basic of JavaScript, I would suggest you to read this book. There are 6 series in total, and the author actually described JavaScript in very details and very easy to understand. Right? So next, level 2. Of course, level 2 is the fundamental of React. So the first thing that we have to learn is we have to know what is create React App. Because with this create React App, we can actually launch a React application really fast. Then we will want to learn what is Reactgs, and then we want to learn what is step props, conditional rendering, and component cycle. Okay, so this is the basics. Of course, there are more, but this is the basic. So create React App. With this create React App, right, we can straight away generate whatever file that we need for React. So if you use npx create React app and then followed by your app name, then the npm will straight away create a folder that is ready for React application. Alright, so I'll show you a video on how to use create React app.
Hi, this is Elijah Manor, and welcome to Manor. In this video, I'm going to introduce the Create React App CLI tool, which allows you to quickly create and run a React application with no configuration. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Before we start, we need to verify what version of Node and Npm we have installed. We can do this on the command line by typing node-v and npm-v. You'll need at least Node version 6 or above on your dev machine in order for Create React App to work. Since we are using npm version 5.2 or above, we could utilize the npx package runner instead of having to install Create React App globally. So, to create our app, we'll run npx create React App Playground. That'll create a new Playground React app and start to install all the dependencies that it needs to run, build, etc. Now let's change directories to our new app, and from there we can execute npm run in order to see all the scripts that are available to us. We have start, test, build, and eject scripts. Let's quickly go through these scripts, beginning with npm start. This will kick off a development server for our app and launch a browser instance to the correct URL. Let's take a look at the code that Create React App generated for us. In the source folder, there are a few files. The index.js file is where our app begins. You can see the React DOM renderer where it attaches to the root DOM element. The app.js file contains the app React component. You can see the header that contains the image we saw, and also the intro text. When we open the package.json file, you may be shocked at what you see. Where are all the dependencies? How refreshing that there are only 3. React, React DOM, and React Scripts. The React Scripts dependency manages all of the other dependencies such as Babel, Webpack, Jest, linting, etc. You can also see that the npm scripts are just then proxies to functionality inside of React Scripts. Let's switch gears and run the tests with npm test. Under the covers, React uses the Just test runner, which is a really nice tool. In our case, there is only one test, but you are encouraged to write your own tests when you start building your app. Now, let's run build script. This will create a production build of your app, and the output results go to the build folder. Once it's done, we can go into the build folder and kick up a simple HTTP server with npx serve. And then we can head over to our browser and take a look at a built version of our React app. Now let's do something fun. Let's install an older version of React Scripts to show the experience of upgrading when there's a newer version. In this case, we'll install version 0.9.0. If we come into VS Code, you'll notice something interesting when you hover over one of your dependencies. VS Code actually shows you what the latest version of that dependency is. If you do use VS Code, you could go one step further and install an extension called version lens. Once installed, this extension adds metadata to your package.json dependency. You'll notice that version lens says that we are using the latest versions of React and React DOM, but for React Scripts, on the left, it says based on our version range, it satisfies up to version 0.9.5. However, the latest version is 1.1.0. If we wanted, we could click on one of these links to update the package.json file. Or, if you prefer the command line, there are some techniques we could use there too. First, let's run npm view React Scripts versions. This will list out all the versions that have been published to npm. However, if you just want the latest official release, you could try the same command, but remove the S at the end. Another command you could try is Npm Outdated, which is a native npm command. It'll check the registry for you and see if there are any packages that are currently outdated. In our case, it says React Scripts is out of date. Our version range is requesting 0.9.5, but the latest version is 1.1.0. This is a great command, however, it's read-only. If you want a more interactive update tool, you could try out npm check with the -u flag. This shows that we have one update, and it's a potentially breaking change since it's now 1.1.0. I'll go ahead and press the spacebar to select and enter to install. The last script is the eject script. If the application that was generated by Create React App doesn't quite fit your needs, Then you can use the Eject Script, which will export all of Create React App's dependencies, configurations, and scripts, and inject them into your app. Now this is permanent. There'll no longer be a quick and easy way to upgrade your app if Facebook makes a new version of React Script. Now that we know the risks, let's say yes. As I mentioned before, you can see a whole bunch of dependencies, scripts, and configurations were injected into our app. Now we can see some things that we did not see before. There's a config folder that contains stuff for Jest, polyfills, and various Webpack configurations. And now we have a scripts folder that contains code for our build, start, and test scripts. And the package JSON file is much larger than it used to be. And you'll notice that there are many dependencies that could possibly use updating. The React scripts dependency used to take responsibility of keeping those up to date and compatible, but now that's your responsibility. If we come back over and run Npm Outdated, you'll see a more concise view of things that may need to be updated. Likewise, you could run npx npm-check-u for an interactive way to update one or more of these dependencies. Thanks for watching this first video in the Create React App series. Stay tuned for more videos to come.
So there's a link to the video here, so later on you can actually review on your own. Okay, so next is Jxs. So Jxs is, okay, if you look at it, right, so the HTML here is actually not the HTML markup that we know. It's actually JXX, alright? JXX is very different than the HTML markups. It's basically, later on there's a video that I want to show you. Never mind, I'll just show you this video.
Alright, welcome. In this video we are going to introduce the exciting topic of JSX. Now, JSX is an extension to JavaScript, which means that it can process things that normally was not part of the syntax of JavaScript, and it will run things behind the scenes. Now, if we come into our JSX starter theme and look into our index.html, we'll see here that we have React and React DOM like we did before, but we've also got Babel. And if you haven't come across it, what Babel does is transpile JavaScript code and rewrite it into something else that other browsers can understand, or that older browsers can understand. So we'll be using Babel quite a bit as we go forward, but eventually it'll kind of become invisible and run in the background through tools. Now, you never want to run Babel like this in production. We're doing it in this case just because we're learning, and it makes it simple so that we don't have to have any build tools to write JSX. However, because JSX is an extension to JavaScript and JavaScript itself doesn't know what to do with it, we have to use a tool like Babel to rewrite it into something that does make sense. Now, as we look at these examples here, we're going to talk specifically about what JSX does and what it's doing behind the scenes. So, zoom in, give ourselves a little bit more room here, and we see that we have our script inside of text Babel. This is, again, just for practice settings. As we go on, we won't use this. Alright, so now we see a very similar practice exercise. It says, create a PL, which is already created, and use JSX to create a paragraph element with the text, hello React. So if you remember last time, we had to do something like this. Right? Is this looking familiar? Cool. Now, with JSX, I'm going to comment this out. Well, let me leave it out so that we can see it, but I'll have to comment it because it'll break. So, what we can do with JSX is write what looks like normal HTML. Okay, so here's how JSX works. JSX will scan your entire JavaScript document looking for a syntax like markup. Okay, so it has within it the ability to parse your entire JavaScript file and look like markup. Now, it's going to distinguish between what is text, remember, because this is a string of text, this is a string of text, this is a string of text, but this is not. So it knows to look for this, and behind the scenes, you know what it's going to do with React? It's going to call create element. It's going to take this value, whatever it is. So if I had a tag, it would take this, pass it into create element, find any children that are going to be between the opening and closing, and it will put them in right here. Okay, so this is what JSX is doing behind the scenes. It's allowing us to write what looks like HTML, and then it will parse it and call create element behind the scenes for us to create the exact same thing. Okay? So that's JSX. Now some people really don't like it and it takes a while to get used to, but most people, once they really get comfortable using it, prefer this to another approach. Now the big downside, folks say, is that then we have our markup in our JavaScript. Yes, React is a user interface library and it has made the decision, especially in partnering, or not in partnering, but most people use React with JSX, even the official docs are written in JSX. They have decided that, yes, in order to create user interfaces efficiently, we are going to have what looks like markup right there inside of our JavaScript. All right. So that takes us to practice exercise number 1. That's all that's going on the page.
That's a brief session about JSX. So next is we're going to look at what is states and what is props. So we're going back to the login form code again. So here is state. This is state. And then this is props. So what's the difference, right? So let's look at props first.
Welcome! In this video, we are going to start learning about props. Props are super important in React because they are the fundamental way in which information gets passed from one component down into another. Remember, we have a one-way data flow in React, so components get data and then they pass it down, they don't pass it up. Okay, all that will begin to make sense as we dig into this. We're inside of our props folder inside of starter, and
always skip forward.
1, practice 2, practice 3, etc. So these are other components that I have already set up for you. So if we come down into practice 1, for instance, we'll see that here's this functional component set up, and at the very bottom, we export it out. There's more going on, and we'll dig into that in a moment. But practice 2, you can see this is also a component, and it gets exported down at the bottom. And what we will do to work with these is we will just uncomment one of them, and then copy and paste that right here as a component call. All right, so now we're beginning to see how we can get different components broken up into different files into here. So we're in practice 1. Let's go ahead and check to make sure we've got that. Now we can run npm start. And that will, of course, go ahead and open up our server for us. Let's give ourselves some more room to look at all of this. And you might see some warnings here that certain things aren't being assigned and used. React is very specific about enforcing that if you're not going to use something, then don't import it, which is why we have these other practice exercises commented out. So let's come into practice exercise 1 and look at what it is we actually have to do here. Okay, so we have 2 components on the page. This isn't common, and later on I will talk about breaking components up into other pages, which makes a lot more sense. However, for now, learning purposes, this is going to be okay. So we've got one component here that has some information. Like, let's imagine it does an API call or gets that data passed into it somehow, and it gets a username and an ID. However, our user component that actually has the styling for everything and how a user should appear is going to be a separate function. So how do we get data from this into this? Now remember, components that we have looked at so far are all functions. So we could potentially do something like this with JavaScript. Now remember, we're in JSX, so to execute JavaScript, we have to do this. We can take ID and username, pass it in as parameters, right? That should not look crazy. That is just normal vanilla JavaScript right there. However, in the JSX syntax, the way we're going to do that is we're going to pass it like this. Okay? So what we have here is we're telling username, hey, you're about to get a property or a parameter of ID, and it's going to have the value of this. Now we can hardcode one in, but remember, if we want to use JavaScript in JSX, we have to use the curly braces. So that's why I have ID there. Okay. Same thing for username. Hey, we're going to give you something called username, and then we're going to give you a value. Again, this could just be something we hard code here, but we're going to set it up with variables. All right, so what happens now is normally we would, inside of here, get access to ID and username. All right, that's how a normal function would work. React doesn't work that way. React will take everything that you pass here as a normal parameter, we are thinking of it like a parameter, and it will attach it to props. So inside of here, notice that I already have this set up. We have props username and props ID. This is props in React. This could have been anything. So we could have called this some random storage value. Notice that our code still works. I've never tried this in production. I don't think you should change the names of props. This is how all the React refers to it and how it is standard. But basically what's happening is they're just taking parameters, values that you pass into the function, and attaching all of them onto props. The other nice thing is that if we console log out props, I don't know if it will be in this case. Yeah, right now we're only getting a few things, but later on in other applications, you may be getting a ton of different stuff in props that you might not even know is there because it might not be referenced. In here, it might just have extra data being passed in. Okay, but that is props, and notice that it goes one way. We have practice one, and it gets passed into user. Now, we could, in this example, this user just could have been right here and it wouldn't have needed to have been a whole other component. But this also points out something which is in React and in component architecture, you want to break your apps up into really small, little niche pieces of functionality, literally just functions, that return a small part of this. So imagine a user would normally have an avatar and a bunch of other things, but that code, and we'll look at later, can be stored in another file and kept off so that it can just be kind of agnostic on its own. That's component architecture. And this is how we pass IDs around. Now you might ask, how do we pass practice up into something higher? Or I'm sorry, how do we pass ID or username into something higher? And the short answer is, as we're learning the basic flow of data in React, we don't. Okay, there are conventions to get around that, but in general, we set data at one level and pass it down. So if practice one needs to get data, it would need to be called at a higher level component. Now this is the highest one we have, so it's being called here and passed down this way. All this will continue to make sense as we go along. Let's keep playing with some different exercises to get more comfortable with props and how.
Alright, this is props. Next, you're going to look at what is state.
Welcome! Over the next couple videos, we are going to see is that rather than having a functional component like we've had in the past, so if I come back into my prop section and look at one of these, notice that we have a function, right? It is written with the arrow syntax, but it is a function. Now, when we get into state, especially when we're just starting off, we're going to switch to using classes. And the reason for this is that React, one of the things we haven't looked at in the React library yet, but comes with it, is a component. So React gives us a default component with a whole bunch of methods and abilities attached onto it. For example, using state, updating state, and doing lifecycle hooks, which we will look at. So the most straightforward way for us to get benefits from all the React components, which we haven't been getting when we write our own functions, we manually pass in props, and other than that, it's a normal JavaScript function. So if we want to get access to state and everything that it has built into that, we can just extend the React component. Sometimes you'll also see it written like this, where they get component out on its own. So it just is extend component. That works as well. But we're going to show the long way here, just because we're getting started with it all. Okay, so how do we add state to an object? Well, this is actually pretty easy. We simply create a new property called state, and we can create state in our application. It says create a username, or in our component, mind you. It says username with a property of some username. So I'm just going to add this real quick. And some username. Cool. Okay. So now anywhere in this component, we can have access to state. Now, why is this helpful? Why don't we just set our own variables and do the same thing with something like let username equal to username and update it that way? Well, there are a lot of benefits, more than we'll get into at this moment, for using state application. But one of the most important to know is that when we update our state and then pass it around, React will do a lot of keeping track of stuff. And in general, it's a good idea with large applications not just to have a bunch of variables, but have an actual state object that is your source of truth for all your data, so you always know it's going to go there. So, to use state, since this is just a normal JavaScript class, so there's nothing unique about this particularly, we can just call, we got to switch to JavaScript, right, so we do curly braces, this, which refers to this component, which is extending this component, So this dot state, which is this, and then the specific thing we want, username. This is all vanilla JavaScript, mind you, okay? This is nothing React about this. So if we run this and I get my stuff up and running here, we can see that we have some username. Okay, so that is our data. Now, I want to point out that we're able to do this because of class fields in JavaScript, but this is not fully supported yet in all cases, depending on when you watch this. So you might see this in some other React code. So let me just show you. They would use a constructor function, which is part of classes in JavaScript, pass props into that, and then call super with props. And what that allows you to do is use this inside of here. So without running this constructor function, normally that would not work. And then we could do this dot state and set up our username and some username. Okay, so even in some of the React docs, you will see this. However, class fields, even though it's not fully rolled out, it is supported by Create React App. So I think if we were to just look at both of these for a second, this one is much simpler than this, right? I think so. So I'm going to recommend not using this, and just know that if you're in Create React App, you're fine, and if you have Babel and class fields supported, then you're good to go, which we do in this instance. So that is how we would set up state. Now what we have to learn about next is how do we go about updating state, because there is a special function called setState that we call, and we never ever want to just call this .state.username and override it directly. So we'll look at that in the next one, but just to review real quick, the important thing here is that we are extending the React component, which gives us access to a whole bunch of tools, including the ability to update and manage state in a component. And then to create state, we're just writing plain vanilla JavaScript with our whatever it is that we want, and then this .state, which means practice state, and then whatever property of state in order to display it. So this is all plain vanilla JavaScript. We haven't even looked at anything that's specific to React yet, but we're about to when we get into set state and how to do that in the next video.
All right, so there is state. So, yeah. Like what the video mentioned, there is set state. So here is an example of set state whereby this is your state. So whenever someone types here, you can actually set the new variable in here, and then you can actually use it in here. So this is how the set state works. So next, we are going to look at conditional rendering. Conditional rendering is very simple. So if you look at here, it's just that when there's a user data in here, then I'll render whole. If there's no, then I'll just render from. So this is called conditional rendering. Next, we'll look at component cycle.
Welcome. In this video, we're going to introduce an interesting topic called the component lifecycle in React. Now, the component lifecycle is a set of hooks for when certain events take place. Certain events that this component goes through. Now, we have created components, we've added components to a page, but we haven't really gotten into the complexity of the data flow through components and when they get updated, and all of the different ways that we could hook into it. Now, in its essence, hooks are just functions that we're able to call and manipulate the flow of data within a component. So there are a bunch of these hooks, and they take place at different times. So what we're going to do now is take a look at these hooks and when they get called. Now keep in mind, some of these are more common to use than others, but we're going to take a look at all of them just so we understand fully what's going on. Okay, so what we see here is an illustrated view of the different functions that we have that are hooks within the component lifecycle. And they break down into 4 stages. We have our initializing stage, which is before the component is loaded to the page, but we do have some information about it. Then we have the mounting stage, once the components are actually loaded to the page and they are there landed. Now they stay in this state until anything is updated. Now remember, if any props are passed into this component and any state above it is passed in as props at any level, then this component will get updated. So if that is the case, we come down into our updating phase, and there are a number of different hooks here that we will look at, particularly things like, hey, should we update this component? We have complete control based on what changes have happened. And we've seen render a bunch, so that should look familiar. components get re-rendered. We'd actually have already seen that in action. We have some other hooks like, hey, did this component get updated, and should we do anything about that? And finally, we come down into the unmounting phase, which is not as common to hook into, but is really important in certain use cases that we might want to clean up after our component, depending on what is going on. So this is the component lifecycle, and we can see it sort of illustrated here, and this may be helpful to you, but in essence, these are just a bunch of functions that we can call to manipulate what's going on with our component and tap in at different times. Now we can also...
Okay, so this is component lifecycle. I'm not going to let the video finish because you can deal on this back at home. So next is level 3. Level 3 is we have to learn about what is router. Okay, so in most of the website we have like multiple links, multiple pages. So how we navigate from one page to another page? So we use React Router to do that. And like for example, we have home, we have users, we have contact. So how are we going to link all these three together, right? So we use router to do that. So here we just declare our route. Like here, this is for home page, and then we have like /users for user page, and then /contact for contact page. So this topic is really important, and it's really you can really go very deep on React Router. So wait. Okay. So this is React Router beginner guide. So hopefully you can read this back at home. So we explain a lot more than I'm just explaining the basics. So here they have covered a lot of different kind of topics related to React Routers. Then level 4 is Redux. So we have another speaker that going to talk about Redux later on. So here I'll just go to the basics of what Redux is.
Okay, ready for diving code? What's up, everybody? Welcome to our Redux lesson for diving code. React and Redux are two very popular tools on the front-end development market right now. Today, we're going to talk about Redux. Yep, Redux by itself. React and Redux are very good matches when they work together, but only by understanding them individually, we can work them together even better. So, what does Redux do? Let's find out. In real life, we have so many things to do, like feeding the cat, picking up children, and cooking, and it becomes harder and harder to remember all of them in our head. What if we have a notebook that holds all the information so that we never forget? Whenever something comes up, we write it into the notebook, and that solves all our troubles. Same with the web page. A web page can do all sorts of things, like buying tickets or booking hotels. To manage all those functionalities, it uses Redux to keep track of important data. Sounds pretty cool, right? But hold on, is that all it is? There's something between initiating the action and actually writing something onto the notebook, or say Redux. Let's try to find that answer by recalling our own thinking process before we write into a note. Let's imagine a room with a washing machine. It's a Sunday afternoon and we're doing our laundry in a public laundry room. So that means we need to get back on time before laundry finishes. There are 3 steps before we write something into our notebook. The first step is to put in the clothes and press the start button. The second step is to read how many time does it need for the public washing machine to finish the job. The third step is to add the current time and the washing machine wait time, and finally write down the finish reminder on that notebook. Now let's review the 3 steps that we just talked about. The 3 steps are: Step 1, starting the machine. Step 2, reading the time left on the washing machine. Step 3, do the math in our own head by adding washing machine time with current time. and finally get the finish time to write onto the notebook. Great, now we know what we should do to convert our real-life action into data. Let's see how Redux do this in the exact same way with slightly weirder names and terms. For the first step, where we perform the behavior of starting a machine, it is technically not within the Redux cycle. But most of the time, you need something to trigger the Redux to start running. For the second step, where we read the wait time from the screen of the washing machine, Redux call it dispatch. Dispatch in English means to send or to convey. Dispatch conveys information from real life into our reducer for calculation. By the way, that information that gets dispatched is called an action. We'll talk about it later. For the third step, where we added the current time and the machine time in our head, Redux call it a reducer. So reducer handles the calculation to get the end time of the washing machine. Finally, the washing machine end time that we write into the notebook is called state by Redux. So state is basically important and dynamic data. In real life, we call that a note, and Redux calls it a state. Whenever we need to look at the recorded end time, we ask for the state, just like how we look at the notebook. Now that we have become familiar with the concept, I'm going to introduce some basic syntax to you. In Dive and Code, we help explaining concepts on a higher level to help people decide what they are going to dive into in the future. This part is to prepare people with relative coding background to dive and code immediately. So if you're not sure what we're talking about just yet, you get there soon as long as you dive into relative coding experiences first. By pressing the washing machine start button, it's the same as grabbing an HTML button element and let it trigger a Redux dispatch process. The dispatch process reads whatever is on the washing machine meter and sends it through a JavaScript object. Redux calls that object an action. This code is sort of hard-coded because we literally put 1.5 hours in the action value key value pair. In order to solve that, we can pass it in through the dispatch function. We call the variable time and use the time in the action value. Let's look at the reducer. Reducer has two jobs. It initiates the state and it changes the state according to the actions it receives from dispatch. What is state again? It is dynamic and important data that Redux tries to manage. It's like a notebook in real life. In this code, we have two cases of starting the machine and stopping the machine. These will potentially change the state when relative actions are dispatched into the reducer. By saying do something with the state in this code, we're doing things like setting the state end time value to null or set it to a certain time. Finally, when the program asks for the state, like how we ask for data from a notebook, we call store.getState.laundry. Laundry is a key that represents one reducer, but in real programming, there can be as much reducers as we want. After writing all those reducers, like laundry, grocery, go to work, etc., etc., we can wrap them all up using combined reducers, just like the first line of the code. Now that we have explained the concept of Redux using washing machine and briefly introduced the syntax, are you ready to dive in code?
So this is the basic of Redux. So once you learn basic of JavaScript, React Router, React Redux, next thing is the advanced level. You can learn about higher order components, React hooks, and style component. Right? So higher order components is I'm not going to talk about here. I'm not even going to show this video to you because we sort of like overtime right now. So you can view this video at home later on. So there are like 3 parts of it, and this is actually a really good video to explain what is higher order components. So this is part 1, and part 2, and then part 3. Alright? So next is the React hook. So React hooks is something that relatively new, that introduced on I think version 16.9. So React hook it's sort of like we convert the traditional React class, component class, back to functions. Alright? So if you look at it, right, the left one it's a bit long, and then the right one is a bit short. So it goes back to the fundamental of how JavaScript developer works. Is like we try to minimize as many code as possible, right? We try to write as few code as possible, right? So this is the classic example of why we create something else and then we think it's too hassle, then we create another something else. Alright? So this is basically how JavaScript works. And there's a mini crash course about React hooks that is, I think is really good, so you can go here as well. And then the last thing is style component. Again, the next speaker is going to talk about style component, so I'm only going to go a little bit brief about style component. So what style component do is here. You notice that this is CSS, right? And then there's a component here. So we have a component of style button, and then there's a component in here that we use style button. And then we basically attach CSS elements into the component itself. So you don't have to write a separate CSS file anymore, you can just write it here. Of course, this is just the basic, there's a lot more details about style component, alright? So let's recap of our roadmap. So the first thing is, of course, you need to learn HTML and CSS. Then you have to learn some basic JavaScript. Then the fundamental React. Then React Router. Redux, then the advanced stuff like higher order components, the style components, and of course React hooks. So if you are new to React, so this is basically the framework, the roadmap that you can follow. Of course, there's a lot more. Like for example, even the basic stuff, there's a lot more things. But with this alone, you pretty much can get your app started. And then as you build your app, then you can learn more things about React. Okay? So here's the resources that I use for this presentation. So you notice that a lot of them actually from DevTalk 2. So this website, right, there's a lot of I think it's a really good articles that you can learn from, especially that most of the writers here are developers themselves. So it's much more easy to understand, right? So here's some links you can go to one by one to learn more about the other topics. So this is pretty much my presentation for today. So don't remember to join the group if you want to get a slide. Alright, so any question? No?
I guess there are so many ways to write JavaScript because JavaScript is such a loosely typed programming language. Just want to know how personally you like to follow standards around the world.
Okay, so what you mean is like how I write the code. Did I follow all the standards around the coding community? So personally, right, I mean, back about probably early of this year, I never actually follow any coding standard at all. Because me myself is a freelance developer, so most of my code I develop for my clients. I'm the one only developers. So a lot of time I didn't follow any guideline at all. But recently, I try to use React App to actually create the React application, because in the past I always use Webpack and then write my own Webpack script and then start from there. So pretty much my own boilerplate instead of using the official one. And then recently that I started to move towards create React App, I feel that it's much more easy to use to create React App compared to if you want to like compile your own boilerplate. I mean, you can do that, but it's just that unless you understand a certain component, like what is Webpack do, how do you minimize scripts, and how does Webpack works, then I think you follow the Create React App is much more a better way. And then even in the Create React App itself, they have a lot of ESLint, then they can actually tell you like, okay, you should do this and you shouldn't do that. So a lot of times in the past, I never actually thought about that, but once I go to that directions, then I realized that, oh, there's actually a lot of standards that you have to follow, which is a good thing. I mean, it's actually make your codes much more clean, and then for others to understand, especially if you work in a team, then you have to write a clean code. Me myself, because I'm a one-man band, so sometimes I don't really think about the need of writing a clean code, but right now I'm actually moving to that direction as well. So I think it's really important to write clean code. Right? Did I answer the question? Okay. Any more questions? We have a t-shirt to give away.
I have a question. So like React is just one part of it. I also did explore a bit, and some of the React actually buckles up into like, let's say React Bootstrap. So how is it? How are they doing together?
Okay, you mean about the Bootstrap framework, right?
Yes.
So, okay, so Bootstrap is a totally separate framework. It's a web framework for designing, and then they make things a lot things easy. But React itself is sort of like you build on top of that. So you use Bootstrap together with React. So it saves you a lot of work. I don't think I answered your question. So can you maybe tell me again what you want to know?
Okay, because I see some of that is, you mentioned one is pure Bootstrap as a Bootstrap and then it combines with jQuery.
Yep.
But I see some as in it's a Bootstrap but uses React instead of jQuery.
Okay. I think I understand what you mean. So, okay, rule of thumb, if you use React, don't use jQuery. It doesn't work. Those two things doesn't work. So if you want to use Bootstrap, you have to use the React version of Bootstrap. So React version of Bootstrap, they maybe there's a jQuery. I didn't look at the library code because me myself I don't use Bootstrap. So, but if you want to use that, make sure you use the React version of Bootstrap because it's going to be different with the much more known Bootstrap frameworks. Because much more known Bootstrap frameworks, they use jQuery, and then in React we behave differently. Like, for example, like when you click a button, right? In jQuery, normally we just listen like on and then we listen for click, right? But in React, it doesn't work that way. Because React, there's only a listener there. We just do like on click in the component and then straight away we can trigger something else. So if you look at that, right? So you cannot use React and jQuery together. It's not supposed to be that. There are some people that use it together, but I don't think that's a best practice. So you should separate that out. So if you want to use any framework that is not related to React, make sure it's compatible with React. So like for example, maybe you try to do a form, like you need to create a form or something. Then maybe you find some form library in JavaScript. So make sure that you find the one that has been wrapped with React and don't use the pure JavaScript version because it might not work in React. So make sure you find another one that normally is like in Bootstrap, right? It will have like, okay, React for Bootstrap, Bootstrap for React, sort of things. So you look for that library. Don't use the original version because it might not work. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. Right? Any more questions? Nope. Which one you want? Sticker? T-shirt? You think about it. Okay. Yeah, that's all for my talks today. If you guys don't have any questions, then we will ask the next presenter to present his talk. Okay. Right?
Before I actually start my talk, I'm just going to introduce myself. So basically, my name is Choi. So I'm a software engineer which work at White Room. So basically, we help people to build apps for web or mobile apps, etc. So what I'm going to talk about today is style component. Another one is hot motion. So as Nathan just mentioned about the style component, so style component is basically just another way of to style components. Or back in the old days when we build our website, we basically using CSS to style everything. But style component, it's still using the concept of, it's still using the CSS syntax to style our UI.
but in different way which work better with the React. So basically I already have a React project set up. So I'm just going to run through the basic of it. Basically, everything's just like simple. If you are really beginners to the React, you don't understand that. I'm really sorry about it because yeah, it's pretty much for like at least you have a basic knowledge about the React. So everything will be kick off with the app component. I have an app component here, and then I already created like two basic components, which is container and button. So if I go to the container, it basically is like it will just render a div with a class name with CSS component. So if I show you the CSS code, this one, so basically what it does is whatever things I put inside the container, it will center things in the center. So yes, in the center. So a lot of people it's really difficult to do this. Yeah, I mean, few years back, if you want to do something like this, it's really difficult to center everything in the center. So basically just using flags, you can just research about it or whatever. Yeah. And another thing will be a button. I specifically like style the things like I have another component button and then have a class name. And the CSS will be something like just a standard thing. I style a component and when I hover it, it animates something. When I click it or whatever, etc. And one thing to be mentioned is I did like try to animate a box shadow. I mean this is not a React thing. Even if you try to animate a box shadow in static website by using CSS, it's always not a good thing because you might want to do something like change the value of the box shadow because you might harm the performance really badly. So you can actually work around by you can search around. They can actually try to like using the opacity to like animate the shadow. You can research about it. Yeah, this is the thing. So. Let me actually start the thing again, just make sure. Oh, sorry. Okay, let's start. Let's go refresh it. So, this is the end result, very simple, the button in the center. So when I hover it, it basically will just scale up and then add a shadow at the back. So when you click it, very basic stuff. So when you look at the code, I'm just going to use the button component. It's very simple. You're using the class name, just like what you did for the static website. And by the way, in React, we're using class name instead of the class because yeah, it might conflict with the other things. So you don't need to use the class name in React. Okay? So very basic. So how about I don't know whether you guys use the Bootstrap, as you mentioned before. Normally how Bootstrap do is you want to, for example, this class name, you put BNT and you start the button into a Bootstrap-like button. So how about if you want to have a arrow button, so you attach another class called arrow, something like this. So you can actually do this exactly same in React. I did have a things here, the class name. So this will be the copy and paste it here. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to type it. Change. Oh, sorry, actually. dash. So, thanks for the remark. Okay. So it will change the limit, which is pretty standard. But in React, because everything is using state, everything is using props. So As we remove it for now, remove everything. So in React, normally how we do things is that I have a button here. I want it to be in error state. So we will pass across all error. So actually this is a short form of this. I want it to be error be true. So how I'm going to like modify my component in the way I can actually like do stuff like this in React way. Okay, so how people actually do is this is normal string. So when you want to do something with it, I attach to it. But how we would want to make the string dynamically. So what I will do something like this. So by using the string templates, so you do something like CSS button, and then I want to dynamically like add and remove the error class, right? So we will use another thing called, this is a CSS thing. So basically we conditioning, we adding the string based on the conditions. So I need to like make the component accept the error cross. So if we have errors, then please return me a CSS button / error. Else you just return an empty string. So I hope you can understand. So basically by default we always have a CSS button class. And then we make a condition. If the error is true, then we return the error class name, else we just return an empty strings, which is very basic. So it will work because I already passed the error here, so it will show rate. If I remove the error props, it is back to the normal one. Okay, so everything looks fine. So what is the problem here? Throughout the whole development process, right, you might have like multiple state for this, in this case like button. You have an error state. Maybe in future you want to include another warning state. So you might think, okay, I'm just going to add another thing at the back. But it will make your code looks really bad because you don't do stuff like it's not even readable in this way. Even I only have one conditions here. So what I'm going to show you guys is by using the style components. So basically style components, you do everything in, they call it as CSS in JavaScript. So you write your CSS inside your JavaScript file instead of have another external CSS file like here. So I'm going to like live code here, so hope it doesn't have any trouble happen. So basically I create another. So for the beginners, so I'm going to show you how we actually create components. So we create another class, another file call. I'm just going to make it like style button. Yes. So inside here, I already installed a package called style components. So basically how we're going to use it is just import the style components. Okay, and then we basically I want to create a component called style button equals to, and after we import style component, basically they have a bunch of things we can use. So what I'm going to use is use the button, and then this is one part we're actually using a backtick. So you can see here in the CSS button, I'm using a backtick here as well because I want to like have a different format for the script, like using this one. Same to this one. This is actually a ES6 feature, which is called template integrate. You can actually get the info about it. It's this one. is, I'm going to start it. So because I'm lazy, so I'm just going to copy all the codes from here. Okay. So you can ignore the bottom part for now. First, I'm just going to come out. So because I'm no longer want to use this classroom, so I'm just going to use this one. Class. So, basically here is like we're creating a button and we want to include this style in CSS style. And then, after we have the components, of course we need to export them, so we can use it in our place. Okay, so now we already have the style component created, which is right here. So we want to replace the CSS button with our new style component version of button. So I'm just going to remove this one and replace with style button from component. And style button. So if you are experiencing JavaScript line, so you might wonder why I didn't like this something like using the relative path. So actually I just learned it from yesterday. So you can actually like take a file called the JS configuration and basically just define what is the base UI. Basically I have here like my base UI basically like source folder. So whenever I type in the things here, it's going to be like related to this folder. So I don't need to type the relative path, which is good when if you want to do some refactoring for your code, when you're moving from back over. So continue, and just replace the button, and go to the code again, everything as a basic. So of course I just comment out the starting line. So if I were like uncomment this one, it won't work. When I hover it and click it, no animation will work. So the reason why is that now we basically chunk all the CSS into one component. So if you experience with the stats before, basically the syntax is almost the same. So instead of, because we no longer have this class inside, so basically we'll just use the extras for menu. So using the exercise. So I think it will work again. So this is by spreading your JavaScript, your CSS into your JavaScript. So into one folder. So if I already have this version of buttons, right? So basically what I can remove is we can just remove the CSS. So less worry about the CSS code. So what the benefit here? Basically the benefit is that if you use the Bootstrap before, so how going to start it? How are you going to install Bootstrap? So basically you want to import the CSS file, import the JQ. So in React, basically how we use the UI library is that we basically install dependency for the UI library, and then we just like import the component and use it. And then some of the library they will just configure, okay, before you actually import my library and use it, you have to import my CSS into your file, which is really annoying. So if you are using the sub component, you write your own UI library, basically you just you don't need to include the CSS folder or whatever. You just include directly one CSS component. Later I will show you an example. So what are the features to like? Because this is a template string. So I can do something like, so remember we have an error thing. So and I want to do something like, I want to pass in error and then return rate. So how we do it? So style component provides a really good way to do something like this. Using the template, and we basically start component with just create a button and then you put the class name here. So this class name is actually injected on top of the head, which you can find here. So on the side, that we do is actually here. So if the buttons got removed from the page, it will actually remove the styling here. So unlike the regular way, which we always insert the CSS file into our website, which is, you usually need to download two files when I browse the web, CSS and JavaScript. In this case, it's only using the JavaScript here and inject style content. Okay? So, now this thing. Nowadays, when we're using the app and a website, so we will have something called theming. So we will have, in our website, I'm going to have primary colors in our website to streamline entire, which means like for the text view, for the buttons, for the radio buttons, I'm going to use exactly the same color, which is called the primary color. So Style Component did provide a good way to actually make all your styling using exactly the same color or even a variable. So I did have a config here, which I already defined the primary colors I'm going to use it, which is magenta, same as the button I just showed you, and an arrow color and a gray. Okay, so I'm going to do something to make it. Now it's pretty much a hard-coded for button. For let's say if I have like text view, whatever, a lot of components, I hard-coded the color in this way. So we might have a problem when we want to change the color. I have to like manually, individually, for each component, I have to manually change the colors here, which is bad. So that's why we have the config file here, and we're going to use this to make the color to be streamlined. So I'm going to use it, and what I'm going to do is import another component called import. So that's the component called theme provider, which actually provides your theme config to your entire apps. So normally when you see a lot of library actually using the provider as a component name, which basically what you should do is to wrap everything into the shell. So in this way, like theme provider. Okay. So this theme provider actually accepting the theme props. So you need to pass in our props, our theme config into these props. So because I already have this file, so basically I'm just going to import that file here. I'm going to using the Visual Studio Code actually having the auto importing. So when I type it, it actually import for me. So now I already have themes. So which means in my style button, I can actually accessing the theme color in this way. So instead of having hard-coded color here, I'm just going to do something like cross or access the theme color and use the primary color here. And since I also have a color set, so I'm going to fix this. So this is error. So I'm going to remove the errors here because so still the same. So if I want to change the color, instead of changing the color for each component, I just going to change the color here. I change the blue, and then the button will turn to blue. This is how you do the theming for the style component. Okay. So so I was mentioning about it's easy to share component with the style component library. So I did have a components here, which is called a text view, which is actually from one of my projects. So it using a sub component as well. So you can see I just need one file and then I'm just going to like drop it into my components. And I'm going to use it, you know. I'm going to hide the button for now and then import the text field. So import the text field. Let me, because it need to put some props which I want a label called like test, which will, okay. I just import the components from other project or whatever using style component. So I didn't include any special CSS. I'm using exactly the same component. So everything just works just fine. And using a theming as well. So this is, and I can actually show you the components here, style components, exactly some style components, and I do some special animations or whatever, so it actually flow or whatever, something like here, which is, yeah, this is the benefit of using style components. Okay? Okay. So next I'm going to talk about how you're actually doing the animations. So normally for simple animations, we using the event, CSS event, like the hardware event, the active event or focus event to animate something. This is very basic. What do you want to do some robust animations? That's a thing called the JavaScript animations. So what is JavaScript animation? So in traditional CSS animations, you can't do animations like really physical. Like you can't do some bouncing. I mean, you can actually do it, but it just doesn't really look so physical enough. Yeah, you can actually include some velocities or whatever. So there's tons of libraries which actually animates by using JavaScript. So one of it is the pop motions. So pop motion is actually provides a lot of animation library that you can use. You can see there's like 5 animations, which some of them you can use it for animate the SVG icons when changing from here to here, and whatever. And there's another called Pure, which is really advanced animation function for you to animate things by using JavaScript. So the one that I'm going to use is actually pop motions. If I click it, you can actually see that the animation looks nice, right? It's much more bouncing, spring, and looks realistic, like physics enough. And yeah, you can actually see the codes, really basic, really simple. So when you actually building applications, right, you want to have a robust animation, you want to have a cool animations. So, but you just a normal developers. You have no idea how to create such a robust animations. You just want something simple, a library can handle all the things for you. And yeah, this is the library for you to use it. And the syntax is actually very similar to style components, which is like pose and then B or button or whatever. So I'm going to like, normally you don't want to like do the hover animation, but let me switch back to the button. So you hover it grows, and then you have a shadow, and you leave it, you just go back. It's just a simple animation. Normally, you don't want to use a JavaScript to style this kind of animation, because it's just simple animations. And using JavaScript animations, it might cause some performance issue as well, so you might need to use it wisely. So for the sake of demos, I'm going to try to use the post animation style, make it animate. So because I already installed the package, so I'm going to import it for now. create a button. I create a button. So, and then because this is not using the method, so it's still using the function, normal function, and pass in the config here. So, okay, because I want to make my button hoverable. So, Post library actually having things called hoverable to make it true. So basically, now this button will listen to hover events and then do the hover animation that we define here. But now I'm going to define the animation. So first, without any hover or whatever, the initial animations, what I'm going to do here. So this is going to copy the code here. The old CSS animations. And then because it doesn't use the CSS name here. So normally in JavaScript we use the canvas. We have this here, and JavaScript doesn't do something like this. We have to wrap it in a string. Okay. So for initial, for backbox shadow, I'm just going to be transparent. Don't show the shadow. And then I want you to be scale at 1. Don't scale for whatsoever. Use it for 1. And because this is an object, so use the comma instead of example. This is the initial state. So what if when I hover it? So if you set the hoverable to true, it will always listen to init and another state called hover. This is where the magical happens. So, sorry. So here, they have the response skill 1. Okay, this is correct. We go to the copy and paste it. And when I hover, just show the shadow for me, and then it's here 1 or 2. Okay. Because I want to I still want to use my style here. So what I'm going to do is I'm explaining the rest of this because I know the events. Listen. So, but you might think these are two different components, separate components. So style components actually accepting custom components that you define here. So instead of dot button or dot thing, you can have something called bracketed and then put your whatever custom components here. But to be reminded that any components that put inside here, you have to accepting the class name props. Because how the style component is that it works is that like I just mentioned, they actually inserting the dynamic class name style in components. So now I'm just going to create my own animated button and then pass it to it and then you just start the button. Okay? So back here. So this is the animate with the post command, but you will see a bit it's a bit slow one. This is one thing when using post is to try not to use transitions, and also in Java and in CSS, try not to use all at all costs because you might make something weird and then you scratch your head to say that what the heck the animation is going weird or whatever. So in this case, I'm just going to remove it because the transitions will actually affect the duration of animations. And you can see. So I don't know whether you can notice the animation is actually much more physical, much more bouncy here. So this is how we actually do the animation by using the post. Everything it actually powered by the JavaScript, and also it also do things like using the if you press it, you want to listen to that event. There's another thing called pressable, and then it goes true, and then you have another state called press. And you can name it. You can actually find the documentation on their website, which is I think it's really good documented. So if we like UI events, you have like hover, focus, press, or whatever, you can actually like demo it. This is the animation. It's almost similar to mine, but for some reason it's great. But yeah, this is actually drag. You can do the drag and drop here, not drag and drop, like dragging around. And then listen to the event. What's the position? And yeah, and giving an animation like this is just like you are thinking I could just do it in CSS then, because it just listen to the events like hover, initial click or whatever. One of the props, one of benefit using post animation is that it much more state focused, because when you're writing a React app, basically everything is state. So in React, how we do animation is that when the state changes, based on the state, I want to animate something. So it's not necessary to have like really predefined state, like however you can actually have state like I want to have another state called A, or and then another state called B. So because I already have a snippet here, which I don't want to type all the things, but I will still run it. So like I mentioned, you can have another config property called pressable, and then you listen when I press it, I want to animate differently, and I have another true state called A and B. So, but it do nothing. Now because I already included the pressable, so when I hover, I click, it will have another different animation. How about the A and B? So I want to do something crazy here. I have another code, let me import that code. So I know the code is a bit complex because it's not meant for beginners, but it's just you just think as the whole thing is just doing one thing. I'm going to explain what it actually do. So we have variables here. It's toggle, so it will be true or false. So the entire thing will be when it will keep on toggling the variables. In this case, it's actually state. Toggling the state into true and false for every 500 milliseconds. So, because I already defined A and B's different animation state here, so how I'm going to use it. So, when the state changes, I want it to be from A to B or B to A. So, you can actually do something like this, passing a props, call the post, and then using the is toggle. Is toggle, if it is true, then you just make it into A state. Else you just use the animation key. Something like this. So the end result will be for 500 milliseconds, it will just like back and forward for some reason. This is great. Yes, okay. Basically, that's might be some mistake in this code. So basically, the idea is that for 500 milliseconds, the state will change from true to false, from false to true. So it will keep on like changing the state to be animate. So if it's true, it will animate to the right, and if it's false, it will animate to the left, something like this. So it actually listens to the state changes and animates to the animation you want. Okay, so let's make it much more interesting. Normally when we build apps, what an animation we can apply to? Pop-up dialog things. So I have a components here, which is called model, which will actually shows a dialog box in front. So I'm just going to import it into my app. So I'm going to do something like this might seem a bit weird. I will explain it. Okay. So why I'm using this one? Basically, this is one of the React features which is called fragment. So when you use it, so whenever you want to have another component side by side with this component, and it will start conflict because some components like team provider, they only accepting one shell at a time. So if I will remove this fragment, you will see they actually have two components, which is CSS only and normal, which will draw an error. So one of the old solution is actually you wrap it with a div like this, which is actually like one component, but the div will actually render on your website, which you don't want it to actually render on your website. You want to be like, I just want two components. I don't want to have another extra elements to wrap around your components. That's why we use a fragment. So it actually render these two without actually render another wrapper around. Okay. So I'm going to show you. If I save it, okay, the model is actually accepting the props called show. Now I make it show. Will show pops dialog box here. So I want to do something like, if I click the button, I want you to show it. So I'm actually creating a state. It's open. So if you don't understand this one, it's okay. It's actually just a state for me to actually cover things. So state. And then I'm passing to is open. So by default, the is open is actually false, which means it won't show the things here. So yeah, it won't show it. So when I click the button, I want it to show. So basically, we are just going to create another event. Well, actually, this is going to do it like this. But you shouldn't do something like this, which, because I want to make it simple. So I want to listen to the event when I click it. I want you to set that is open to true. Something like this. So when I click it, it will pop up. So something missing here. Definitely the animations. This is a snapping. And it is not a good UX because user might feel lost. Because all of a sudden everything just changed. Where is my button? Am I in a different page or what or something? It's actually a same page. So the something is actually is an animation. So because I already defined some of the animations for the dialog, this is some of them. I need to define all the animation here. This might look a bit complex, but basically I need to show you. So when the things enter, I'm going to scale up, and when things is invisible, everything will be scale will be 0, opacity will be 0, everything is hidden. And when you enter the page, I want you to scale it to 1, and the opacity is 1. So it will be visible, and we can actually customize the animation with the keyframes to be using the spring animations. So it will be like a bit bouncing when it show up, and then you can actually delay the things. Actually having two things here. One is overlay. Overlay is the background. So you can see that the background is actually a bit darker. I call it overlay, and this is a cut. So I have two different components, and then at the end, I actually like combined into one thing. Okay, so just now I actually passing the it shows, right? So this thing, so if it is true, then you render this thing, which you render the overlay and card, and it is false, you just show nothing. But writing code like this, it will just snapping the components without any animations. So how am I going to use it? I already have a state enter and exit for both overlay and card. So we can technically do something like just I mentioned before, using a post and then do some crazy logic here and then change it. But there's another component provided by the props. The post animation is post group. Okay, so I'm going to wrap everything inside here into post group. Post group. Okay, so if you want to pass something into the props group, I mean the body of it, it must be an array or a list. In this case, it's actually not an array here. So we want to make it into a array. So how we do it is that we can actually copy the code here and remove this thing. So if it is true, you just return me an array with a component, so we can copy here. So basically what the post group do is that whatever something appears or disappears from inside, it will animate. And the animation will depends on what are the animation we define for each individual items here. So in this case, I already have the animation defined for the overlay and card. So let's just see it. So if I click, it just have a nice and weird animation pop up. And as I mentioned, there's a spring field, kind of bouncy, big, something like this. How about exit? I actually have the on click, which when I click the cut, and I want to do something. So let's just do another one last thing here. I copy the same code, but in this case, I'm going to change it to false, which will close the dialog. Okay? So when I click it opens, I click, this is bounce back, which is really nice. And the code is not hard at all. You can actually do the same thing with some other animation library like React Transition Group. But that one, you need to create another external CSS file to animate it. Or if you want to use style component, you can go ahead. But if you're using that library, you still need to create a CSS class, which is really hard to maintain. And one of the good things in this one, and the style component is that if I will show you the CSS button, so okay, you work on the project for quite a long time, and you want to make some change to the button, and then your button getting complex. This one is still simple, but in the future you might want to like wrap a lot of things into one button components, and you want to change some style of it. And developers like me like use Visual Studio Code because of the features. You can click and then link to another file. But in this case, because the class is actually a string, so I want to know where is it. I want to browse it. So I have no way to like actually browse the thing. So how you do it? You basically go to the global search and then search a class name and then you found the file and click it. A lot of steps to do here in order to change the style. But using style component and post, basically everything is just in one component class. I mean one component file, which is very easy to maintain and refactor. And even though if I want to change the style button into a different page, it won't break anything because I didn't like import anything CSS file. And if I'm using a native path, that might be a key. Yeah, for a complex project. Okay, so you can actually browse, go to their website, and you look at what kind of animation they actually have. They have like tons of things. Like I can actually show you some for example. We all the items. So it's actually using a post group, which means when something inside the post group change, you will try to animate it. With you don't need to think about the JavaScript logic. You just need to define what are the animation you want and it just do it for you. Yeah. So basically, this is the introduction for the style component and the post animations. So that's it. So do you have any question on to ask? Yeah.
I can start.
Yeah.
If I'm very impressed with your button and I want to reuse it in my project,
Yeah.
but I don't like, for example, the overlay animation. Can I somehow override it?
Yeah.
How do I like?
Oh, that thing. It actually depends on how I actually design the components. In this case, I actually designing the dialog here. So you don't like the animation, you want to change it, right? So that's one way. One way is that I directly copy this file to you, and then you modify the animation here by yourself. But normally, it is not people do. Imagine if this is a library, right? You import it like how you actually import the style component. Imagine this is from a library and you want to customize it. It's really up to the author of the library whether they provide a way for you to customize animations. So
I cannot extend it and just override it.
You mean like have another, make it like extend it or actually, for example, this button. So now currently the buttons only it listens to the Harvard animations. Right? So if I want to do something like extend animation, when the page loaded, I want it to be like do some animation and then show up. You can actually do something like this by creating another post animation wrapper wrap around the button, so you can actually like animate the buttons.
What about removing?
Removing it. So this is why they provide a component called a post group, which means whatever inside got removed or rendered, it will based on the animation you define and then play the animations like exit and then enter the animations. This thing. So I don't know whether I answered your question. So if you say that I give the button, I give the dialog components to you, you want to extend the animations, it's really up to the author whether they want to provide a props for you to customize the animations.
So the short answer is it's difficult.
It's difficult, but it's possible. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
How you deal with such complex applications where we have kind of parent component, child component,
Yeah.
and for example, a parent component should define the style of the children.
Yeah.
With style components, is it easy to do?
Okay. I can actually. Yeah. This is a good question. So, just now I showed you the text views. Right? This is the text view components. You can see there's a bunch of chunks here. So I have the parents are actually the style components, but I didn't do the style component for the rest of the components inside the child. So why? So basically, the way I define the style components is I have the style components, and then I define you can make it as a class here, and in this case it's going to be like whatever the label child in this component, you do something. So it is exactly the same. If you make this into the class, right? So in the label, you can do something like you just insert class name with the name of label. It will work. So this is how if you are regular CSS guy, you want to do something like this, you can actually do stuff like this. Okay. So part of the project I worked on previously, which using the post animation and the style components. So the thing will be like all the bouncing, you click it, and things just show. So all these colors here is actually using the theming provider. So it's very easy. Everything is very possible, and it's easy to maintain. And just now the text field that you saw, I actually grabbed it from this project. So without any extra CSS import, I just import the CA and JavaScript code. It just works out of the box. Yeah. So
another question. For example, in your team you have a CSS coder who knows nothing about React coding, so it's easy for him to style and style your components.
Oh, you mean like you have a universal class to can be applied to different components, right? So it's really up to different developers. So for me, for myself, I always think that when you're writing a React apps, right, you want to share the code components by components. So yeah, it's real. Back in the day when you're building a static website, you tend to be like sharing the same style for different items. I mean like button, text field, or whatever. But in React, I always think that keep everything into one component and share it with the entire component. So I mean you can actually sharing style, but normally I'm only sharing the colors throughout by using a CSS or a Sass throughout your entire apps. But if you say that you want to share, make the CSS class to be shareable, it's really up to you. See whether, because style component is not a necessary thing for you to actually want to use it in. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, any method callbacks that we can use, for example, by default using the hover thing,
Yeah.
can make it listen when it goes to
Yeah. I'm going to show you their website. Go to their documentations. That's they call the events. So when let me find the codes here. So okay, for example, you make it draggable. So you drag something. So this is not a drag one. Okay, you drag something, and it happens. So I want to do something like when I start dragging or when I finish dragging, I want to listen to the events. They actually provide an event listener like drag and drag start or whatever. You can actually pass in a function which is an event to actually do the things that you want to do. Which you can actually get a lot of information there. Yeah. For example, this one. When the drag is end, we do something. When the drag is start, we do something. Yeah. So, no questions? So, yeah.
One more.
Yeah.
You mentioned Sass and Nathan mentioned Sass. Is Sass a competitor to this, or they work together?
They actually work together. Basically, Sass is for me, it's like a better version of CSS. So in CSS, normally you can only define things like this. You can't define a nested CSS here. But Sass, you can actually define things like this one. But in style component, style component is actually like using some advantage of Sass, which you can actually define define everything into one class. If you see this as an entire class, then means that you can actually define something in the.
But I can't use Sass to inject things inside here.
So far, I don't, based on my knowledge, I never do that before. But I think you actually can. You actually can, but I kind of forgot how you actually do it. But actually done it before. Before the team provider actually came out, I actually using the stars to share my color across the app. So I remember, I think it's something like you need to pass in something like a parameter inside, and then you just make it cross. And if you like want to access a class in the SAS, you can actually kind of access it here or something. Yeah. So, if no question, I'm going to wrap up my thing. So, thanks for attending my talk. So, I'm going to pass it to the next speaker.
SAS and style component are not competitors because style component is an extent to SAS. You have to understand SAS in order to do style component. Otherwise, it will be very confusing because you can't jump from CSS to style component. You must have from CSS, you learn a little bit from SAS, and then you go to style component. Because my experience is I was a SAS developer coming from SAS before converting to style component. So my experience is like, yeah, at the beginning it's you know, you used to be like you have one like button class, and then you used to have that button class on all the other your code. But somehow when you convert to style component, you can't do that anymore because it's a different environment. But it takes some time to get used to it. But once you get used to it, I think style component has a better way of doing things, but because it's much more compatible with React itself. And from my personal experience, is like this is probably the thing that I want to move forward to instead of going back to SAS again, right? Okay, so our next speaker, he's going to talk about Redux.
Started. Can I get a show of hand if anyone know about Redux or have used it? Pretty much everyone know about Redux. So what's the point? So for those that who don't know Redux, so I'm going to give a bit of introductions and talk about some core concepts about Redux, how it can be helpful for your projects and so on. My name is Hee-Sian. I'm a software developer at White Room Digital Agency. So in White Room, we build custom applications for our clients, including mobile applications, websites, and CRM, etc. Basically, what clients want, we will try to access it and build it. In our company, we are a lover for React, including myself, in basically using React for all the front-end projects. So I came from the background of jQuery and those era when you have a bunch of front-end frameworks to pick. So I find it ends up with React because I just find it easier and faster. So what is Redux? Redux is basically a state container. It's created by Dan Abramov, which is a guy that you will see him a lot in the React talk. If you do Google YouTube about React presentation and so on, you'll probably see him. So he is this guy here, smart dude. So Redux is actually inspired by Flux, which is presented before Redux. You can actually use Redux without React. So if you have another front-end applications you want to build and you have complex states you want to manage, you can actually use Redux. So Redux and React is not really like tight coupled together. So what are problems that Redux solve? The problems that Redux solve is state management. So let me show you a roadmap of, this is a bit off topic, so let me show that if you want to become a React developer and if you're new to React, right, this is a roadmap that is showing in 2019, if you want to become a React developer, these are all things that you need to know, which can be a bit crazy. So of course, first you need to learn the basics. You need to know your HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript, and then you need to have general development skills. So those are like, you need to know Git, you need to know your HTTP and HTTPS protocols. Of course, the most important ones that you need to know how to search for solutions. You need a Google skill, and followed by some data structure algorithms and design methods and so on. So those are general development skills that you need to know before you jump into React. Then in React, right? So there's a bunch of things that spawn out of React. So you have your build tools, you have your styling components, you have your state managements, and so on and so forth. So what I'm showing, the reason I'm showing this is that you will notice that state management is actually part of the things that you will encounter later on in your React project. I'm hoping that everyone is familiar with React states and props and etc. Right. So to recap, right? For a simple React components, so this is a simple React component that is without state involved. So it just has the props, and here you can render the components back and parse in the names, and you will know how to render the results. And this is another example when state is involved. So say for example, here we have a timer component, and it is ticking every second. And how we do it is that we will have our state that's get managed in the component. And we will set a timer, so basically every second we will call our tick functions to update our seconds. So in React, you will describe your UI in these render functions, and how the only times when the render functions will get called when changes are done is either through props or either through states. That's the only two points that when render function is called, that we call the render functions. Right. So if let's say we're using React component states to manage our states without any external libraries, this is a problem that you might face later on. So say for example, imagine that this is your applications where you have nesting components. So say the A could represent your application, and B could be a sections in your page, and then D would be some parts where it could be that it's input fields that you type in text and so on. Then the problem is when, let's say, if the state is just in the D itself, there's no issue there, because you can just put in your states in the D nodes here, and there's no issue. The problem comes when you want to share the states to your other components. Say, for example, our E-friend here. So how would you how would you solve this? You will basically have to, instead of storing the states in the D nodes, you have to pass it all the way up to the A nodes, and then pass it down to D. So if just 3 levels of involvement is probably fine, but you will imagine that in your typical application you have multiple nesting components, so you probably have to pass down multiple levels up and downs. So it's a bit shitty if you code it that way. I mean, you will find it shitty if you code it that way. So here to visualize the example that I gave. So let's say in our D nodes, we have a text field here. So whenever we're typing, we will update our inode. So yeah. So in Redux, the way to solve this is by having an external store, and every components of your React, you will subscribe to the stores. So whenever you want to access the states, you just go and ask the store, say, can I have my text input? And then they will just pass it down to you. So there's no more like you have to pass the props from your parents to your child, and then to your child, and to your child. And the same goes if you want to update your states in your store, right? So you will have actions inside stores to update it. Right. So the basic concepts of Redux is pretty much like the diagram I showed here. Sometimes I feel like Redux can be quite scary and it's quite hard to learn, but if you know this three concepts, it's pretty much the sum of Redux. And so what this represents is like sort of like a grinder, right? So in order for you to come up with your outputs, which are states, right, you need to put in your actions, and then it will pass into this reducer, and then it will output you a new state. So that's sort of like the short summary of it. And another representation. So let's say we have our actions. Whenever we trigger actions, it goes to the reducer, and then reducer will take the actions and then give you the next state, and then it will store it into your store. And then your store, if your UI is subscribing to the store changes, then it will update it. You will get new state changes, and then your UI will update it. So the three things, remember the three things, action, reducer, and store. So inside Redux role, action is pretty much just like an object. It's a pure object. It describes what's the changes. So the mandatory things in the actions is that you need to put in, you need to have your types property, and then it will be a constant value. And then the rest will be some of the payloads that you want to pass to your reducer, which I'll show an example with. Then you have your reducer. Reducer is basically a pure function which returns next state. I think this line is pretty much sums up what is reducer quite clearly. So what it does is that it's a function that takes in the previous states and your actions, and then you will do all the new state, your next state. So the important thing to note is that reducer needs to be a pure function, meaning that it cannot have dependencies, and it has to be immutable. So this example here is that, so if we pass in a actions called sort plugins, right, it will return us a new state, and it will return us a new state based on the actions here. I'll show an example later to explain more. The last concept is that you have your store. Store is a plain object which holds your application states. And your application states is pretty much just like a JSON object that is describing your applications. And the only way that you can update the states is you have to throw a dispatch. You have to call the dispatch functions and also passing in and describing your actions. Right. So that probably sounds a bit like too wavy and doesn't have any context. This example here, which I grabbed from Redux website, pretty much sums up the whole Redux in actions. So you have, so in this example here, right, you have your reducer, which here we call, which is a function we call helper, and it has a default state 0 and is taking actions. So if we pass in the actions for increments, it will just return the new states and then increase the state. And if we pass in the decrement actions, it will just take the states and then reduce the count. And if our actions doesn't match the switch case here, then it will just return the default states. Next, then, so I'll talk about the store. So then we need a store that's holding your states. And to create the stores, you just have to pass in the root reducer, your reducer to your store function. The third piece of the store APIs that you can, whenever it changes, whenever you fire actions, right, you can subscribe to the changes. So here we are passing callbacks to the subscribe methods, and whenever we fire actions, then we will just console log the state. So if you then when you want to decide actions, you will just use store. You call this dispatch functions in store and then pass in the action. Yeah. So say if we pass in types increments, it will in our console logs we will find it output 1, and if we increment it again, then we will output 2, and so on. Example. So let's say we take this Redux concepts and we put it into a simple vanilla HTML. So here we have our counts, which is initially 0, and then when we press, when we increase it or decrease it, it will update. So if we do this in vanilla HTML and JavaScript, this will be how it looks like. So we have our HTML, and then we have our JavaScript here. So here is the reducer functions that you saw earlier, and basically it understands the actions that you are telling the reducer to do, and then you update state accordingly. Then you will have to create your store, which is holding all the states. And then just, in the vanilla JavaScript, you will have functions that is that will render the states outputs and then put it inside the value elements. So whenever we have new changes, whenever we dispatch actions, and then it will do our new states, then it will call render functions. So and here we are just attaching event listeners, click event listeners to the buttons. So for increments, we will then dispatch increment actions, and for decrements as well, dispatch decrement actions. So then with all of this, right, then you have your vanilla HTML that is implemented using Redux. Does that make sense? And does that make sense? Feel free to throw in questions and drop me. So what about using Redux in React? So I have an example here that will show how you can use Redux in React. So say here we have our to-do applications. So if we type in a new stuff, it will just render into the list. So the apps components pretty much that we have our app to do form and then our to do list. So when you want to integrate this with Redux, right? You need to create a store and passing in the root reducer, and once you have your store instance, then you'll need to pass that store instance to the provider. And with React and Redux, they actually have an official bindings, which is called React Redux, and it's pretty much like the gold standard if you want to use Redux and React together. So you'll be using this library here. And in this index file here, this pretty much sums up this is pretty much the first steps to set up Redux. So if we navigate to the apps, like I said before, it's pretty much just render the app to do components and to do list. So if we go into app to do, it's basically a simple forms and have a text input and the submit buttons. So once when we submit the values, it will go and trigger the onSubmit function in forms. And here we are just calling the dispatch functions to add the we are calling the add to do actions to add our new to do. So in our actions, right, how it looks like is you have what we are taking is a new text parameters, and then we are adding a new ID here. So in our reducer for the to-dos, you can see that whenever we receive an action called add to-do, it will grab the values that we set in our actions, and then create a new array items in our array. Then in the to-do list, in the to-do list, how we are getting all the states in the store is we have to call the connect functions from React Redux and then parse in the map state props. What this is doing is that once we receive the new changes, or once there's a new changes, it will trigger this function here. And here, whenever this is triggered, it will give you the whole states. And then what we are interested in that states that we just want our to do. So here we are creating an object that just have the to do. So what this will do is that it will put in it will grab the states from Redux and then put it and pass it to the to-do list as a props. And then you can access that properties here and then do a map functions to render out the to-do items. And then it's pretty much it. So to summarize, right? Whenever to summarize, when you want to set up Redux in React, you have to pretty much this is the boilerplate. You have to create your stores, and then you have to wrap your application with the provider by passing the store. And afterwards, whenever you want to subscribe to the changes in your components, you just have to call the connect functions and pass in the function to describe how to select the states out of the store. And then what it will do is that it will just automatically put the properties into your components. And whenever you want to make updates to your stores, you have to use the set functions, which you get by wrapping your component with the connects. Yeah. So I know that probably doesn't explain it quite well, but here are the advantages of using Redux, right? With this kind of flows, it will make your state changes predictable. So whenever you have some state change, you can always look back to what actions causes it. And instead like a typical two-way binding systems where you have your models and your models will update some UIs, so it gets a bit crazy. It also scales up with applications, and so by that I mean once because your states is become more predictable. So when you have a lot of states to manage, especially when your application go big, then Redux is kind of a good fit, and it makes your code quite maintainable, and it has increased your code maintainability as well as it will provide organized structures to your projects. It also makes it easy to debug your state changes. So I'll show an example. So in Redux, there's an extension called Redux Developer Tool. So there's Chrome extensions called Redux Developer Tools. So if you have set up a project with using this developer tools, what it will give you is that it will let you track all your actions in your Chrome DevTools. So you can see that I have added a new to-do, and here this is the text that I've typed in. And if I add a new one, you can see that I have a new to-do here. And if I navigate to the states, you can see that right now the state is holding a to-do array, and these are them. So I can so if I want items to complete, you can also see that the actions are there. What is powerful with all of this, right? It actually allows you to do time traveling. So say imagine if you have if your kind application ends up in a state that it's very hard to debug what's been happening because there's just way too many actions firing and it's hard for it to track. If you have this installed, you can actually use these features to traverse back to your history state. And all of this is possible is because all your states, all your variables, right, they are just in a single centralized place in your store, and which makes this possible. And lastly, since all your mutations your state mutations are all separate into action, reducer, and stuff. You can make unit test cases a lot easier. And yeah, and that's it. Yeah, if I don't have any questions, feel free to ask. Cool.
Hello. Thanks, Hee-Sian, for the talk about Redux. So we have our last speaker here, Song from Sydney, right? Yeah. So he's our emergency speakers to edit up on pretty much last minute. So he's gonna talk about very high-end stuff. So if you love this sort of like high-end React stuff, then you're gonna love this stuff. Alright?
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and Penang and the Dev Circles for Facebook for organizing the event and sponsoring the place and the food. This kind of event is very important for local tech communities, so props to everybody for showing up as well. So today I'm going to talk about distributing your React apps as a binary. I'm Tom, I'm from Monomix Software. I'm usually available for hire. You can find more in the monomix.sh. So today we're going to talk about how to distribute your React application as a single binary, including your API server and whatnot. So traditionally, when you deploy a React app with your API, it works something like this. So there's your server written in Ruby or Node.js or whatever language of your choice. And it reads from the file system to serve React JavaScript bundle or CSS, your font, your image, and stuff like that. And maybe you'll have a reverse proxy in front like Nginx or Apache. And then finally, the reverse proxy will serve the assets to your user or API response in JSON or XML. But what I would like to talk about in this talk is simplifying the process, simplifying the whole architecture so that it becomes more like this. So your server program will have a file system embedded in it so that it doesn't have to do the disk I/O every time you want to serve to the client. So what can it do for you? Why should you distribute your React application as a single binary? Well, there are a couple of reasons, a couple of things that this can do for you. So first, it allows users to self-host. For instance, if you have a React application that your users that you want to just distribute to your user for them to self-host. If you have like complicated build process, for instance, it will be very hard for users to grab your program and self-host themselves. But if everything is embedded in a single binary, it's going to be very easy for them to just grab the binary and run them on their server. That's one of the reasons. Another reason is that another thing this can do for you is it's easier to sell your software in case you're selling your software. For instance, if you are selling your React application for people to host themselves. Maybe they're enterprise customers that want to host everything themselves. Then if you have just a single binary, then you can just sell that binary in return for a fee. Basically setting a license to use a binary. No build process is required in that case. Maybe it can simplify your build process a little. When you deploy your application, all you have to do is maybe just to upload a single binary to your server. And this can save a lot of time in the build process, especially if you're doing something like auto-scaling. Maybe if you're spawning more instances as your traffic increases, then all you have to do is to maybe grab the binary from your, in case you're using AWS, maybe from S3 you can just grab the binary, spawn a new instance, and then just put up your program without having to do any build process. And finally, no disk I/O, so it's gonna be, maybe it'll be good for the latency of your program. So in this talk, I'm going to give you a real-life example called Denote. It's totally open source. You can have a look at the source code at github.com/denote/denote. It's a fully open source note-taking application that I've been maintaining for the past 2.5 years. It's completely written in React. So if you're looking for some non-trivial React applications that people actually use in production and is fully open source, you're welcome to take a look at this. So a little background is that it's written in Golang for everything like API and job processing, and everything in the front end is React. So again, this has been going on the development has been going on for the past 2.5 years. So it's a very complicated React application. So the basic idea of distributing your React application as a single binary, there are 2 steps. First, you have to sort of write your backend in a language that can produce a single binary. Maybe you can write your backend in C or Go, things like that, which compiles to a single binary that you can just distribute to your users. And second step is a key step. You have to embed your static files into your binary instead of your binary doing any disk I/O to read those files. So then how do we embed the static files into maybe you'll have a React JavaScript bundle and CSS like a Sass file or something like that. Well, you can simply write a script. There's nothing that a simple bash script can't solve. Or you can use, there are a lot of libraries exist to do this work for you. In this example, I'm using a library called Packer. And this slide, by the way, will be available on the Facebook group, so all the links you can follow along if you do that. So this is not exactly JavaScript code, because it's the API, server-side API code for Denote, but it will give you an idea of how this program works by embedding the whole JavaScript bundle inside the binary. So this function called start command is the entry function for Denote. So whenever users grab a binary and they run it, this function will be executed. So it does all database stuff, and also calls the mailer to initiate all the email stuff. And it executes a job like a background job processor on a separate thread, a separate process. And then finally initializes the server. So there's a lot going on inside the single binary. First, we're handling the database I/O, and then background job processing, and then we also have a server. And server is responsible for serving the API response as well as the React application React JavaScript bundle and CSS files and fonts. So we're gonna have a look at the couple of things. So this init server function is going to do two things. First, it's gonna spawn a reverse proxy to forward all the API requests that are prefixed by /API into an API server, an API response handler that's inside. And we are actually interested in get app handler, so everything else other than API will go into this handler. And this is where the magic happens. So by using this abstraction called Packer, we were able to embed everything, all the React JavaScript bundle inside the binary. And if you can see this HTTP handler, so basically this just takes a request and response object. If you're familiar with Node.js web servers, that's the same. It's the same concept. So we have request and response. Everything, all the requests basically we serve index.html as a web shell. And notice that we don't do any disk seeking. We don't even touch the disk. Everything is embedded inside this single binary. And if we have a HTTP request that starts with /beast, then it finds a necessary asset like a JavaScript bundle, image, or your font file, your React JavaScript bundle. Again, we don't do any sort of disk seeking, so there's no need to touch the disk. Or for you, your users don't even have to worry about grabbing any JavaScript file or running Webpack configuration or stuff like that. Everything is abstracted inside this handler. So right now the architectural diagram looks like this. So you have a single binary called denote server, and inside it many different things are running concurrently. One of them is file system. We have effectively created an abstraction over the file system and directly embedded that into the binary. Now our React application is entirely encapsulated inside the binary, so that your users don't have to worry about they don't even have to have any JavaScript runtime on their machine in order to run this program, or they don't even have to know if React even exists. They just need a machine with that can execute a binary, which can be compiled for Linux, macOS, or Windows previously, any kind of platform, because it's binary. I mean, binaries are you can compile it cross-platform anyway. So the magic of this is that your users don't even have to know that the React exists in order to use your React application. So as I said, there are two benefits of this approach. This can in your current or next React application that you want to distribute to your users. If you follow this approach, then you can gain portability, which makes it easier for your users to self-host your React application. Or if you want to sell your program for an enterprise customer, you can just give them a binary. Effectively, you don't have to give them any build process or any manual. And it's also another benefit of this approach is that it's very easy to upgrade the software. say that your user was using your React application version, let's say 0.1.0, and you want to bump the minor version to 0.2.0, all they have to do is to grab a new binary and then run that binary instead of the old binary. So if they had to worry about the React build process and stuff like that, then they will have to maybe grab the new entire code base, configure Webpack and stuff, build a new JavaScript bundle, which can be quite time-consuming and error-prone. So this talk was about how to distribute your React application and backend in a single binary. So there are a couple of links that I want to share. Again, this slide will be available in the Facebook group. First is the GitHub link to the project if you're interested in learning more about the React application and production. And second is my Twitch stream. I sometimes do live coding on React if you would like to check it out. So that's me, and thank you very much for your time. Yes.
How do you persist the data when you upgrade the data? Since it's embedded inside the binary, the settings or any data files not carried forward.
So the question was how do we persist data between the binary, for instance? Maybe users might have configurations for the first binary. Files or databases. In the first case, maybe we'll have a configuration file that the binary reads from. That is stored outside the binary, inside the user's machine. So we can persist any data we need to migrate to the second binary into a separate file in user machine. Or any other states really, it doesn't really probably not a very good idea to persist any data inside your application anyway, because it makes your application kind of stateful. So as you said, it's a good idea to use a database and stuff like that, which provides us with another layer detached from the binary to store all our data. So that was a good question. Yes.
So how is this compared to Electron? Yes, and the question is, do you have an example that you have read from and with your binary?
So I'll ask the first question first. So the first question was, how does this compare with Electron? Yeah, that is actually a good question. Electron. So this is similar to Electron in that maybe you can distribute your React app as a single thing, a single entity. But Electron is as far as I understand, it's a wrapper around Chrome. So you can run client-side applications with the UI and stuff with Electron. But with this approach, you can also run server-side applications. Maybe you want to run your binary on your server and serve your React applications using HTTP server and stuff. So does that answer your first question? And your second question was? Example of? Yeah, so the second question is, do I have an example of a React application wrapped in a binary? Actually, you can find it at the previous slide. So Denote is actually fully open source, free and open source software under GPL license. So it's free and it's distributed freely as a single binary. All the server and client source code you can download freely, and they're all the React application itself is all encapsulated in a single server binary. And if you're curious about the build process and stuff, they're all open source as well, in case you are wondering how it's done. Yes?
Compared to the React that you do in the normal way, how much of the performance is
So the question was, compared to distributing React JavaScript bundle in a traditional way, maybe what are some performance implications in terms of memory footprint or file size? Is that the question? Yeah. So the answer is that I haven't actually benchmarked this, so I can't say for sure. But since all we're doing is embedding the JavaScript bundle inside binary, which is essentially a find and replace operation, I would assume that, again, this is an assumption not backed by any evidence, but I would assume that there's no difference in the file size actually being transmitted over the wire to the user. Performance gain would be that now your app doesn't have to do any disk seeking to serve the file. Then again, a lot of production applications nowadays, they use CDN of some sort instead of doing disk seeking every time. Maybe they have a cache layer, like HTTP caching, like Varnish, or maybe they have a CDN like CloudFront or Cloudflare. So in this case, I would say it's very hard to definitively say which one is better. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks Song for the talk. Okay, so this concludes our meetup for today.